What's good, everybody? Welcome to Origin Story, the podcast that interviews creators about where they came from to understand how they got here. My name's Phillip Russell, and I'm with my co-host,
Ben Thorp.
And welcome to this new podcast called Origin Story. Really excited to kind of get this thing going and get it out in the world finally.
Yeah, and Phil, here we are. We're going to be interviewing a bunch of creators. We have a bunch of people on docket. But we wanted to take a moment to kind of set this show up. And in order to do that, listen, it's an origin story about us. We're the origin story interview.
What?
Boo, 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 boo.
That's pretty meta.
Yeah, this won't ever happen again. Don't worry, folks. We just want to help, ground you in the world and where things are going to be.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that you all realized, we're real people and, we have some perspective that's worth sharing and to be good guides for these conversations that we're having with creators across video games, music, art, literature, film, and television, and anywhere else.
Yeah, and Phil, maybe now would be a good moment just to talk about this kind of kicked off because you had this idea, and I think specifically you saw a gap in kind of video games coverage and the way that video game coverage kind of treats or talks about or doesn't talk about creators. So do you want to maybe talk about what that idea is?
Yeah, so it was probably at the beginning of the year. One of my good friends on Twitter, Natalie Flores, who is a journalist working for Fanbyte and a variety of other outlets, had tweeted out this tweet about, if you could have any opportunity in the games industry, dream opportunity, what would it be? And, I had sent a random tweet that was essentially like, I'd love to interview creators in games about the human stories behind these projects they make that I love. And, I didn't think anything of it. And then Ben had responded to me and was like, dude, we could literally make this happen. And lo and behold, here we are. But, in turn, basically the ethos of the podcast was it started in the games industry where a lot of the time the projects are the focus, and the people who make the games are oftentimes put to the wayside. You don't really hear a lot about the concrete histories and backstories of the people that make these things. And I was just really interested in talking to different developers in games and hearing their own stories about how they got started, maybe some backstory on certain mechanics and influences in the projects that they're doing, and hopefully demystify a bit about how you get into games and how these things that millions of people around the world love are made. And since we started doing it, it's quickly expanded into talking to people from all these different backgrounds. And I think that's largely because Ben and I are both writers, and we both have produced podcasts in the past where we have a very eclectic background and things that we like. So it felt pretty natural to make this almost interdisciplinary or intersectional podcast with art from all over.
Right. And I think in a lot of ways it's expanded out. We're talking about, I think, we're talking to both kind of writers, we're talking to musicians, but I think a lot of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, kind of centers around stories and trying to unpack stories and writing and how that, sometimes interacts with things like game design. But in a lot of ways, I think, the through line that you might find here is our interest in narrative. And so, Phil, why origin stories? What is it about an origin story that is interesting for people or is something that is a good in for having these conversations with folks?
Yeah, well, I think to start, you can tackle origin stories in two different ways. There's the more biographical way where it's like, here are the facts, here's, X, Y, and Z of somebody's life or somebody's history in relation to a project and how it was created, which is what you might read on a Wikipedia page or whatever. It's kind of like the concrete things that are gathered, your primary sources in some ways. But on the flip side, I'm really fascinated as a creative nonfiction writer of hearing people's own personal connections to their histories in the projects that they create, because in those ways you don't have to start at the beginning. Oftentimes origin stories don't start at the beginning. They might start before we're even born, or they might start 20 years later from our birth. And I think that leads to really fascinating stories, and a fascinating lens to approach these different kinds of artistic projects that we love, right? So for instance, you all are going to hear in these conversations, I think, interesting insights into people's lives and how they kind of flow into the projects in unexpected ways that you're not going to get if you just, look at the development history, or the writing history or production history of whatever the project is, from a very like eagle eye perspective. So largely, I think we wanted to start this project to give creators the agency to tell their stories in relation to the things that they make. And it's also just a way to, document history, right? Like, especially in games, these histories of the people that make them are like largely never told. I think that other mediums have done a better job of making sure to document those stories, but games is still has a long way to go in that way. So that's kind of where I started. I don't know, Ben, if you have other kind of things that have interested you as we started the project.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, and you kind of touched it on it there, is just like getting people's kind of personal perspectives to understand. I think once you start getting the story of how people got into writing or creating games or creating TV shows, you start to, I think, be able to pick apart the art that they've created in a new and really interesting way, that once you have their own personal perspective, that I think Phil is right in a lot of ways, especially in games, you don't really get. It suddenly kind of casts this new light and gives you a new kind of leg into some of these projects in a really interesting way.
For sure. And I mean, we don't want to spoil who we'll be talking to, but we'll just say that we're talking to people from a wide array of backgrounds. And it's, for me, it's like really exciting to kind of see these this confluence of talent and artistic perspective all coming together into this one space. And I mean, at the end of the day, I think Ben and I have always been really interested in storytelling and hearing people's stories. Like, Ben and I have known each other for just about a decade at this point. And yeah, we're getting old, we're getting gray.
Those wrinkles are starting to come in.
They're coming in, and this isn't our first podcast. Like, we've done road trips around the country interviewing people about death, belief, and the metaphysical. Ben also has a climate change podcast. Ben, if you want to tell him just a little bit about what's going on with that.
Yeah, eschatology. So I have a good amount of climate dread, and was reading a ton, and then thought, in the saddest way possible, oh wow, I can turn this into a podcast. I can interview these people, have these conversations, because I guess I should also say I work in public radio. That's what I get paid to do, and so it allows me these options to talk to a lot of smart people about these different issues. And so that was something that I was like thinking about a lot, and I was like, okay, maybe this is something that I can do something with, and try to turn some of that dread into, oh, I'm going to learn about this, and hopefully, make it something that other people can learn about as well.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not going to keep you all here much longer. We're definitely excited to get the conversations flowing, and you can expect, at least for this first kind of cohort of guests, that we're going to have many episodes to come, and we're really excited to get started. So look out for more stories in Origin Story, and if you have any suggestions in terms of people that we should talk to, suggestions in terms of how you think the show could be better, or things that you'd love to see more of or less of, we'd love to hear from you. And we can't wait to kind of get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I think, once this launches, we're really going to open the doors up and be interested in what people have to say, or about who they want to hear from. Okay, so I think that should be everything that we need. The basics for listeners who want to, I think, follow us, you can follow us on Twitter at @originstory_. You can also follow me at sad_radio_lad. Phil, how can people find you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at 3D Cisco, like the musician, on Twitter, or you can follow us at our website, originstory.show.
The music that you have been hearing and you're about to hear again is produced by Ryan Hopper, so huge thank you to him. And the art comes from Melody Hirsch, so thank you to her for making that for us. If you have any questions, concerns, ideas, you can also email us at theoriginstorypod@gmail.com. Phil, anything else?
I think that's it. Once again, thanks for checking us out. If you do enjoy the show, you've probably heard it a zillion times in every podcast you listen to, but leave a review.
Reviews!
Give us some stars.
Please!
Tell your friends.
We need them.
We need them. That shit does help. Yeah, if you have any feedback, you've already heard us say it. Hit us up and tell us what you think. So we will see you all again here shortly on the first real conversation of Origin Story.